What if I told you that a modern presidential administration saw 92% of its most senior advisors quit or be fired within a single term? 92%. That's not a typo. That's a level of turnover that would bankrupt any company on Earth. It's a number that screams instability, a revolving door spinning so fast it's a blur. But what if I told you that for a certain style of leadership, this wasn't a bug, it was the entire feature? Welcome to Mindcast. I'm your host, Will. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most powerful and perplexing phenomena in modern leadership, both in politics and in the corporate world: the rise of the chaotic leader. We've all seen it, the constant barrage of headlines, the seemingly endless stream of controversies, the strategy that feels less like a chess game and more like someone knocking the entire board over. But behind this whirlwind, there's a blueprint, a powerful research report I've been dissecting, titled The Architecture of Chaotic Leadership, lays out this blueprint with stunning clarity. So today, my promise to you is this. We're going to pull back the curtain on the mechanics of this strategy. We'll explore why it's so incredibly effective at seizing power in the short term, and, most importantly, where its fatal structural flaw lies. This is the first of a two-part series. Today, we're focused on the actions of the chaotic leader. In our next episode, we'll examine the other side of the coin, the systemic vulnerabilities these leaders exploit within our own institutions. Let's get into it. Our first key insight is about understanding the primary weapon of the chaotic leader. It's not persuasion, it's not policy, it's your attention. The strategy is called flooding the zone. The phrase was famously coined by former political strategist Steve Bannon, who explicitly said his goal was to flood the zone with shit. His primary enemy wasn't the opposing party, it was the media, and by extension, the public's ability to focus. The idea is simple but devastating. You don't try to win the argument, you create so many arguments, so many fires, so many controversies all at once that it becomes impossible for anyone to keep up. This strategy is so effective because it attacks a fundamental vulnerability of open societies. Our systems are built on an Enlightenment-era assumption that a free market of information will elevate truth through rational debate. But flooding the zone causes that market to collapse. When visibility replaces credibility as the primary currency, truth can't compete. It creates a world of echo chambers, filter bubbles, and structural domination by those who can generate the most noise. As political analyst Jonathan Rauch observed, this strategy is explicitly not about persuasion, this is about disorientation. And it has become a standard playbook for autocratic leaders globally. Viktor Orban in Hungary, Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey, Narendra Modi in India all use these tactics to manipulate the public square, distort perception, and crowd out independent journalism. Even opposing political factions, like Democrats in the U.S., have started debating whether they need to adopt more is more zone flooding tactics just to compete in the saturated environment. Think about it. Journalism, regulatory bodies, even our own brains have a finite bandwidth. This strategy is designed to overwhelm that bandwidth. It pushes out a torrent of executive orders, shocking statements, and policy reversals in such rapid succession that no single issue can ever be properly scrutinized. One day it's a proposal to buy Greenland, the next a plan to rename the Gulf of Mexico. It's not about achieving those things. It's about making you, the media, and the opposition chase a dozen different rabbits at once. The goal, as one analyst put it, is not persuasion, it's disorientation. It manufactures exhaustion. Up to 65% of American adults now report actively reducing their media consumption just to cope with the information overload. When people are exhausted, they disengage. And in that vacuum of disengagement, chaotic leaders can operate with impunity. And let's be clear, this is not just a clever political trick. As Zsolt Kapelner of the University of Oslo argues, it is an inherently anti-democratic strategy that deliberately exploits cognitive vulnerabilities. It's a direct attack on the Enlightenment-era ideal that a free market of ideas will elevate the truth. That ideal falls apart when the market is flooded with so much noise that credibility is drowned out by sheer visibility. The 2025 Trump administration, for example, deployed this with breathtaking intensity. In a single day, March 27th, the news cycle was deliberately swamped with wildly divergent stories, from withdrawing a UN ambassador nomination to cutting aid for Rohingya refugees to escalating deportation battles in the Supreme Court. It's a strategy of manufactured chaos designed to paralyze the very systems meant to hold power accountable. And this isn't new. The playbook was written decades ago by the tobacco industry. When the science became undeniable that smoking kills, they knew they couldn't win a factual debate, so they manufactured a controversy instead. Their internal motto was, "Doubt is our product." They flooded the zone with their own junk science, funded front groups, and lobbied politicians to demand impossible levels of proof. The goal wasn't to prove that cigarettes were safe, it was to create enough noise and uncertainty to paralyze public health action for decades. This mirrors other historical instances of corporate delay, like with asbestos and lead exposure, where regulations were stalled for decades despite the science being clear. The goal is never to prove a counter-narrative, but simply to destroy the value of credibility itself, ensuring that essential decisions are indefinitely delayed. But here's the fascinating twist. While flooding the zone works to paralyze political opponents and the media, it often backfires spectacularly in the corporate world. The recent case of Elon Musk's involvement with the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency is a perfect example. Musk's tactic of constant media saturation hijacked news cycles, but it operated as a spotlight, not a shield. In the corporate sphere, a relentless stream of headlines interconnects negative stories, preventing public sentiment from just fading away. The data shows that media fatigue doesn't lead to public forgiveness. Instead, visibility without credibility breeds deep market volatility. During the first 100 days of this strategy, Neuralink saw a 60% spike in negative media sentiment, and Tesla's stock fell by 24%, wiping out 25% of Musk's personal wealth. It's a critical lesson. Financial markets punish erratic messaging and performative chaos with capital flight. For a business, consumer trust isn't a temporary advantage, it's everything. This tactic mirrors other historical instances of corporate delay. The health consequences of asbestos and lead exposure were known for decades. Europe banned lead-based paint in the 1920s, yet American regulations were stalled until 1978. This wasn't due to a lack of science, but a lack of political will, induced by manufactured uncertainty. This historical analog demonstrates that the goal of zone flooding is never to prove a specific counter-narrative, but simply to destroy the value of credibility itself, ensuring that essential decisions are indefinitely delayed. This brings us to our second major point, and it's a crucial one. What happens inside an organization when the person at the top operates this way? If the external strategy is to create chaos, the internal strategy must be to control it. And this leads to a toxic dynamic, the prioritization of personal loyalty over actual competence. In a normal organization, expertise, data, and honest feedback are valued. They are essential for navigating complex problems. But in a chaotic system, an expert who brings bad news or points out a fatal flaw isn't seen as helpful. They are seen as a threat. They are disloyal. Their competence is an obstacle to the leader's agenda. The shift from a merit-based to a control-based system is often subtle at first, but under pressure, disruptive leaders begin to see any structural resistance, empirical warnings, honest critiques, as a personal threat. Independent thinking is reframed as insubordination. Over time, the organization absorbs an unspoken rule: survival depends on compliance. This creates what empirical studies call burnout syndrome. Toxic leadership acts as a chronic stressor, driving emotional exhaustion and disengagement. The inevitable result is massive turnover as the most competent and ethical employees who once felt connected to the mission lose their resilience and depart, taking irreplaceable institutional knowledge with them. And so begins the purge, which we saw at a breathtaking scale in the Trump administration. The 92% turnover rate for senior advisors wasn't an accident. It was the result of aggressive ideological loyalty tests. A Government Accountability Office report revealed that in the first 6 months of 2025 alone, over 134,000 employees left major federal agencies. The Department of Education workforce, for example, cratered by over 20%. The administration even wasted millions placing hundreds of civil rights investigators on paid leave, leading to 90% of student discrimination complaints being dismissed without review. This is the real-world cost, a catastrophic loss of institutional knowledge and a crippling of the government's ability to execute its most basic duties. This isn't just a political phenomenon. The corporate world is littered with the wreckage of companies that prized loyalty over competence. Look at Enron. Their infamous rank and yank system, which forced managers to fire the bottom 15% of their employees every 6 months, created a culture of profound paranoia. Delivering bad news was a career-ending move, so whistleblowers were rebuffed and critical systemic failures were actively covered up. Executives like CFO Andrew Fastow used complex accounting tricks to hide billions in debt, all while the culture rewarded flouting the rules in pursuit of profit. The result was the largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time. Then there's the story of Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes built a multi-billion-dollar company on a captivating vision, but internally, the culture was defined by absolute intolerance for dissent. This brings us to the tragic story of Ian Gibbons, the company's chief scientist. He was a brilliant expert with over 60 U.S. patents. When he voiced the technical truth that the company's machines just didn't work, he was marginalized and intensely pressured by leadership. The psychological weight of this fraudulent environment ultimately drove Gibbons to suicide the night before he was scheduled to give a deposition. Finally, take Uber under its co-founder Travis Kalanick. The company's motto was always be hustling, fostering a toxic culture that flouted regulations. When cities around the world tried to enforce local laws, Uber deployed a chaotic evasion tactic called grayballing, a program that used a fake version of the app to actively deceive regulators. This algorithmic aggression and embrace of chaos eventually led to a Department of Justice investigation and Kalanick's forced resignation. In case after case, we see the same pattern. Prioritizing loyalty over competence is a fatal, structural flaw that leads directly to ethical and financial ruin. So, if this strategy is so destructive internally and based on illusion externally, how does it keep working? And more importantly, where does it stop? This brings us to our third and final insight, the Achilles heel. The greatest strength of chaotic leadership, its ability to create more noise than the system can process, is also its fatal vulnerability. This entire strategy collapses when it is forced into a strictly rule-bound environment, and the ultimate rule-bound environment is a courtroom. You can't flood the zone in the deposition. A judge controls the docket, limits the scope of inquiry, and enforces perjury laws. The courtroom relies on rigid epistemology defined by strict rules of evidence. In jurisdictions like West Virginia, strict guidelines dictate what is admissible, how witnesses can testify, and what constitutes valid documentary evidence. For example, under the Daubert standard used in federal courts, expert testimony faces hypercritical scrutiny of its methodology, preventing speculative junk science from ever reaching the jury. During cross-examination, trial lawyers use disciplined techniques like the 5-question rule to extract concessions and impeach credibility, creating a structured environment where evasive tactics fail. In a trial, a litigant simply cannot flood the zone. The chaos is contained. And when aggressive, chaos-based strategies encounter this structured reality, they routinely disintegrate. The 2020 election lawsuits are the perfect case study. In the court of public opinion, the Trump campaign successfully flooded the zone with allegations of fraud, dominating the news cycle. But in actual courtrooms, it was a bloodbath. They filed 62 lawsuits and lost or had 61 of them dismissed, often by judges they themselves had appointed. Why? Because their claims were based on hearsay, speculation, and guesswork, which were immediately thrown out. They couldn't meet the evidentiary threshold. The chaos strategy hit a brick wall of formal scrutiny. Let's break down exactly why those lawsuits failed so spectacularly. In the courtroom, chaos dies and facts matter. The lawsuits collapsed against three main legal standards. First, hearsay and speculation. In cases like Bauer v. Ducey in Arizona, the claims relied on anonymous witnesses, speculative expert testimony, and what the court called sheer guesswork, none of which is admissible. Second, evidentiary thresholds. In a courtroom, you need actual verifiable evidence. In Ward v. Jackson, the evidence presented demonstrated the ballot duplication process was 99.45% accurate, completely debunking the claims of malicious fraud. Third, sanctions for bad faith. The courts recognized the strategy for what it was, an abuse of the legal process. A judge in one Arizona case labeled the lawsuit groundless and filed in bad faith for the improper purpose of undermining public confidence. Lawyers like Sidney Powell were heavily sanctioned, facing potential disbarment for submitting lawsuits crafted on false information. The legal system has antibodies for this kind of chaos, and they kicked in with force. We see the same pattern with conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. For years, he built an empire by flooding the zone with lies about the Sandy Hook massacre. But when the victims' families sued him for defamation, he tried to bring his broadcast tactics into the courtroom. He defied court orders, refused to turn over financial records, and used his show to attack the judge. The legal system's response was absolute. The judge issued a rare default judgment, stripping him of his right to even argue his liability. He had forfeited it. During the damages trial, bound by oath and unable to perform for his audience, his defense collapsed. He was ordered to pay hundreds of millions in damages, bankrupting his company. And in the corporate world, the Uber versus Waymo trade secret case tells the same story. Uber's defense was initially built on aggressive denials and stalling, but under the strict oversight of a federal judge who demanded documents and a clear timeline, their chaotic defense crumbled. When a 37-page letter emerged detailing Uber's corporate espionage program and use of disappearing message apps to destroy evidence, the jig was up. Stripped of their ability to create noise and faced with cold, hard facts, Uber was forced to settle for $250 million and unprecedented legal oversight. In a rule-bound arena, reality always wins. So, let's put it all together. What are the actionable takeaways from this architecture of chaos? I think there are three that are really important for all of us. First, learn to recognize the pattern. When you feel overwhelmed by a constant stream of outrage and controversy from a single source, understand that this is a deliberate tactic. It's designed to exhaust your attention. The goal isn't to inform you, it's to paralyze you. The countermove is to practice what some call critical ignoring. Protect your focus. Choose what you give your attention to and refuse to be drawn into manufactured distractions. Appreciate the value of structure. We often think of rules, procedures, and institutional guardrails as boring bureaucracy, but this analysis shows they are essential. They are the fire breaks that prevent chaos from consuming everything. They are the systems that enforce accountability when noise and bluster fail. Whether it's the federal rules of evidence or a company's internal code of conduct, these boring structures are what ensure long-term stability and success. They are the immune system of a healthy organization and a healthy society. And third, Understand the critical difference between visibility and credibility. In the age of social media, it's easy to mistake one for the other. Chaotic leadership is a masterclass in generating visibility, but as the corporate backfires show, like Tesla's stock dropping after a fire hose of erratic messaging, visibility without credibility is a dangerous game. It creates profound instability and signals risk to markets, investors, and consumers. True influence isn't about being the loudest person in the room, it's about being the most trusted. Credibility is built slowly through consistency and competence. Visibility can be manufactured overnight. Don't confuse the two. So, the life cycle is predictable. A chaotic leader rises by overwhelming the system with noise. They consolidate power by demanding loyalty over competence, hollowing out the very institutions they lead. And for a time, they seem invincible, untouchable. But they mistake the temporary evasion of accountability for actual success. And when they are inevitably dragged into an arena where rules matter and facts have weight, the entire structure collapses under the weight of its own lies. It's not a sustainable model. It is a spectacular, volatile, and ultimately self-destructive dead end. Make sure you subscribe because this is only part one. In our next episode, we'll dive into systemic vulnerabilities, the exploitation of good faith, enforced neutrality, and the paradox of tolerance in organizational behavior. We'll explore what happens when systems built on an assumption of good faith are weaponized by those acting in bad faith, and how the very rules designed to ensure fairness can be used to dismantle a system from within. You won't want to miss it. If you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe to Mindcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for lending me your attention today.